The quiet was the first thing they took from him. His office on the 14th floor had a view of the river. It was a small thing, a corner of glass and steel. They moved him to a cubicle in the basement. The room hummed with server heat. No one told him directly. An email from facilities simply stated his new location. His keycard no longer worked on the executive floor. The move happened over a weekend. His plants were left in the hallway. One died from the chill. Samuel did not complain. He was the head of regulatory architecture. It was a title he created himself. The company, Aethon Logistics, operated in a gray area. They moved freight for aerospace firms. The regulations were dense and international. Samuel's job was to find the permissible paths. He built operational frameworks. They were dull, technical documents. They were also the only reason Aethon could function. The new CEO, Alistair Vance, did not see it that way. Vance was brought in by the board for growth. He gave a talk on his first day. He spoke of disruption and lean methodologies. He said legacy roles would be evaluated for synergy. Samuel watched from the back of the auditorium. He saw the man's eyes slide over the older employees. They held no recognition, only a measurement of utility. A week later, Samuel's department was dissolved. His team was reassigned to it and legal. Samuel himself was given a new title, Special Projects Analyst. It reported to a junior manager in procurement. The humiliation was procedural. Samuel's access to the governance servers was revoked. He received a calendar invite for mandatory training. It was on the new corporate values. Vance's signature initiative was called the Streamline. All projects required a Streamline impact form. Samuel's current work was not a project. Therefore, it had no form. Without a form, it could not be assigned resources. His requests for legal review were automatically archived. The system sent a polite, automated reply. It cited policy S-7. No one had ever heard of policy S-7. In his basement cubicle, Samuel opened his personal briefcase. It was old leather, scuffed at the corners. Inside was a single encrypted USB drive. He had copied it on his last day as head of his department. It contained every framework, every interpretive memo, every compliance opinion he had ever written. It also contained the master permissions log. He had designed the company's access control system. His name was not on the design document, but he knew its architecture like a blueprint. He knew where the silent alarms were, and he knew which doors were marked as exits, but were actually locks. A calendar alert chimed softly. It was for a one-on-one with his new manager, Chloe. She was 26. Her office was on the 3rd floor. It had a window. Samuel took the stairs. He arrived exactly on time. Chloe was on a video call. She waved him in, but did not mute herself. He stood by the door for 5 minutes. She finished with a laugh. She turned to him and smiled. It was a bright, empty smile. She said she was excited to leverage his institutional knowledge. She asked for a top-line summary of his active work streams. Samuel said he was conducting a continuity assessment. Chloe's smile tightened. She said the streamline was about forward motion, not continuity. She asked him to fill out a streamline impact form by end of week. She said all work required a business champion. Did he have a champion? Samuel was silent. Chloe said that was what she thought. She turned back to her monitor. The meeting was over. As Samuel left, he heard her sigh. She muttered about dead wood. The door clicked shut behind him, back in the basement. Samuel did not fill out the form. Instead, he opened a terminal window. He logged into the legacy audit system. It was a system slated for decommission. Vance's 8 team had forgotten it existed. Samuel typed a series of commands. He pulled the access records for the board's confidential portal. He saw that Alistair Vance had attempted to download the full corporate bylaws. He also saw that Vance's attempts had failed. The portal required a physical security key. Only 3 existed. Samuel had one. The board chairman had another. The third was in a safe deposit box. Vance had not asked Samuel for the key. He had not asked anyone. He had simply tried and failed. Samuel noted the date and time of the attempts. They coincided with Vance's first week. He saved the log as a plain text file. He gave it a meaningless file name. He placed it in a subfolder on the drive. It was the first piece of a puzzle. He did not yet know the picture, but he knew the shape of pressure. It was a quiet, legal, procedural pressure. The following Monday, an all-hands email went out. Vance announced a strategic pivot. Evelyn would aggressively pursue new government contracts. The sector was lucrative. It was also fraught with compliance requirements. The email mentioned a new business unit. It would be led by Vance's hire, a man named Carl. Samuel remembered Carl. He had been a sales director at a failed drone startup. His LinkedIn profile was full of buzzwords. Samuel opened the company's regulatory database. He searched for the foundational compliance frameworks for government work. They were tagged with his digital signature. They were also marked as Archived 2020 Legacy. A meeting request appeared. It was from Carl. The subject was Regulatory Roadmap Cinch. It was scheduled for 45 minutes. Samuel accepted. He arrived at the conference room to find Carl and two young associates. They had a sleek presentation ready. Carl talked about relationship leverage and agile compliance. He asked Samuel for the quick wins. Samuel said there were no quick wins. He said the federal acquisition regulation was 4,000 pages long. He said Evelyn's current insurance expressly excluded certain government liabilities. Carl's face darkened. He said Samuel was being obstructive. He said the CEO had mandated this initiative. Samuel asked if the board had approved the capital allocation. Carl was silent. One of the associates shifted uncomfortably. Samuel then asked if the audit committee had been briefed on the liability exclusion. Carl said that was Samuel's job to fix. Samuel said he no longer had the authority to request legal opinions. He cited Policy S-7. He said his streamline impact form was still pending. Carl stared at him. He said he would have Chloe escalate the form. After the meeting, Samuel went back to his terminal. He pulled the master vendor contract. He searched for the insurance section. He found the exclusion clause. It was paragraph 14, subsection C. It was a standard clause for commercial freight. It was catastrophic for government work. A single incident could pierce the corporate veil. Personal liability for officers was a possibility. Samuel printed the clause. He printed it on plain paper. He did not highlight anything. He placed it in a manila folder. He labeled the folder Project Hermes. He locked it in his desk drawer. That evening, he worked late. The basement was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed. He accessed the board portal, using his physical key. He navigated to the minutes archive. He read the most recent meeting. The board had expressed caution about Vance's growth plans. They had asked for a risk assessment. Vance had promised one. It was now 2 weeks overdue. Samuel copied the relevant section of the minutes. He saved it. He then wrote a short, plain email to the head of internal audit. He used an anonymous encrypted remailer service. The email contained only a question. It asked if the audit committee was aware of the insurance exclusion under paragraph 14, subsection C of the master vendor agreement. He sent it. He cleared his browser history. He went home. The next day, a new dynamic entered the office. Internal audit began asking questions. They asked procurement for all vendor contracts. They asked legal for all insurance policies. The requests were broad and routine, but their timing was interesting. Samuel watched the email chains grow. He was copied on some as a formality. He saw the confusion. No one could find the original signed copy of the master vendor agreement. The digital version was unsigned. The paper copy was missing from the records room. Chloe was asked to locate it. She sent a frantic email to Samuel. She asked if he knew where it was. Samuel replied calmly. He said the contract would be under the custody of the legal department's records officer, per policy L-3. He attached a copy of policy L-3. Chloe wrote back. She said the records officer was on maternity leave. Her backup had been laid off during the streamline. Samuel did not reply. He let the silence speak. An hour later, Vance's executive assistant sent a blast email. It announced a mandatory all-leads meeting. The subject was operational discipline. Samuel was not a lead. He was not invited. He was, however, in the basement copy room when the head of legal printed the agenda. The first bullet point was securing critical documents. Pressure was building, but it was diffuse. It lacked a focal point. Samuel provided one. He submitted his streamlined impact form. He listed his project as regulatory continuity and insurance compliance. He listed the business champion as to be designated per S-7 protocol. He submitted it into the workflow. The system automatically routed it to Chloe. She approved it without reading. It then routed to Carl as head of the new business unit. Carl rejected it. He cited lack of strategic alignment. The system sent Samuel the notification. It was a digital dead end. Samuel printed the rejection. He placed it in the Project Hermes folder. He then performed a simple action. He requested a formal, written clarification of his reporting lines. He sent the request to Human Resources. He cited the employee handbook. He asked whether H&Don. Samuel forwarded the HR email to the head of internal audit. He asked for guidance, as the audit committee oversaw compliance. He used his official email. This was a visible move. It created a paper trail. An hour later, he was copied on an email from the audit head to the general counsel. It asked for a meeting to clarify compliance responsibilities. The general counsel was a careful man. He was also overworked. He replied that he would schedule something after the quarter ended. He copied Alistair Vance on the reply. Vance's response was immediate. He asked why this was being escalated. He said operational issues should be solved at the team level. Samuel watched the chain unfold. He saw the moment Vance entered the fray. He saw the general counsel's retreat. He saw the audit head's polite but firm insistence. The system was beginning to groan. It was a low, structural sound. Only someone listening for it could hear. Samuel listened. He opened a new file. He began to map the contradictions. He linked policies to clauses. He linked clauses to liabilities. He linked liabilities to board resolutions. The map was a spiderweb of dry, boring text. At the center of the web was Alistair Vance's signature on the new strategic initiative. That signature created a duty of care. Vance likely did not know it, but Samuel did, and soon the board would. A calendar invite appeared. It was from the executive assistant. It was for a one-on-one with Alistair Vance. The subject was collaboration discussion. It was scheduled for 15 minutes the next morning. Samuel accepted. He prepared no documents. He wore his usual suit. He took the elevator to the executive floor. The receptionist pointed him to Vance's office. The door was open. Vance stood by the window, looking out. He did not turn when Samuel entered. Samuel stood in the center of the room. The silence lasted a full minute. Vance finally spoke. He said he understood Samuel had concerns. He said he valued Samuel's long service. But he said the company needed to move fast. He said sometimes old structures had to be broken. Samuel said nothing. Vance turned. His face was calm, but his eyes were impatient. He said he was reassigning the compliance question to Carl's team. He said Samuel should take some personal time. He suggested a week. He said to consider it a reset. Samuel nodded. He asked if this was a formal suspension. Vance's smile was thin. He said it was a suggestion. A strong suggestion. Samuel left the office. He did not go to the basement. He went directly to the parking garage. He drove home. He knew what the suggestion meant. It was the first step toward constructive dismissal. They wanted him to quit. He opened his laptop at his kitchen table. He logged into the company's virtual private network. He still had access. He navigated to the board portal again. He downloaded the certificate of incorporation. He read the article on officer indemnification. It was standard. The company would protect its officers from legal action, unless the officer acted in bad faith or with gross negligence. Samuel then pulled the draft of the government contract proposal. Carl's team had already circulated a first draft. Samuel read the executive summary. It claimed Aethon had full compliance with all relevant regulations. It listed insurance coverage as comprehensive. Samuel saved a copy. He noted the date. He then opened the unsigned master vendor agreement. He highlighted the exclusion clause. He created a one-page document. It simply placed the proposal's claim next to the contract's clause. He did not add commentary. He saved it. He titled it, Contradiction 74E Twin for Audit. He then did something procedural. He filed a formal ethics report. The company used a third-party service. It allowed anonymous reporting. Samuel did not remain anonymous. He filed under his own name. He reported a potential misrepresentation in a government proposal. He cited the document versions. He stated that without a signed insurance waiver, the representation was inaccurate. He submitted it. The system generated a case number. It also triggered an automatic alert to the board's audit committee chair. This was a feature Samuel had insisted on years ago. He had argued for it in a memo about whistleblower protections. That memo was now archived. But the system rule was still active. His work phone rang an hour later. It was the general counsel. His voice was strained. He asked Samuel to explain his ethics report. Samuel said the report spoke for itself. The general counsel asked if Samuel had discussed this with his manager. Samuel said he had been strongly suggested to take personal time. The line went quiet. The general counsel said he would look into it. He asked Samuel to please not file any more reports. Samuel said he was duty-bound to report discrepancies. He cited the company's Code of Conduct, Section 4. The general counsel hung up. The next morning, Samuel received a formal letter from HR. It was delivered by courier to his home. It placed him on paid administrative leave. It cited a need to investigate his ethics complaint. It instructed him not to contact colleagues. It told him to return all company property. Samuel boxed up his laptop and phone. He dropped them at the front desk. He kept his personal USB drive. He also kept the Project Hermes folder. It was his personal research, he reasoned. It was not company property. He went home and waited. The trap was now set. It was a trap made entirely of policy, clause, and procedure. Vance had walked into it. He had done so by following his own instincts. He had dismissed, ignored, and rushed. Now the machine would turn. Samuel simply had to let it grind. The paid leave was a silence of a different kind. It was not the hum of servers. It was the quiet of his own apartment. Samuel used the time. He did not rest. He began a systematic review. He started with the company's bylaws. He moved to the board committee charters. He cross-referenced them with SEC filings. Aethon was privately held, but it had debt covenants. Those covenants had reporting requirements. Samuel tracked every obligation. He found a discrepancy. It was minor, almost invisible. The audit committee charter required an annual review of all material contracts. The definition of material was in an exhibit. That exhibit referenced a dollar threshold. That threshold had not been updated in 5 years. Inflation had eroded it. Many more contracts were now material. The master vendor agreement was one. Its insurance exclusion was therefore a material term. The audit committee had not reviewed it. This was a failure of governance. It was a dry, technical failure. It was also a lever. Samuel documented it. He created a timeline. He showed the charter's effective date. He showed the inflation index. He showed the contract's value. He did not accuse anyone. He merely presented the arithmetic. He saved the document. He did not send it. He waited. Meanwhile, at Aethon, the machine was turning. The ethics report could not be ignored. The audit committee chair, a retired judge named Harriet Colvin, requested a briefing. The general counsel had to provide it. He was forced to locate the missing contract. He found a scanned copy in an old disaster recovery server. It was indeed unsigned. He had to contact the insurance broker. The broker confirmed the exclusion was active. The general counsel's briefing to the audit committee was therefore grim. He had to admit a potential problem. Alistair Vance was furious. He saw this as sabotage. He demanded to know who had filed the ethics report. The system told him it was Samuel. Vance instructed HR to begin termination proceedings. He cited insubordination and a toxic attitude. HR prepared the paperwork, but the legal department paused it. The general counsel advised caution. An employee on leave for an ethics complaint was protected. Firing him could be seen as retaliation. Vance dismissed the concern. He said the leave was paid. He said they had cause. He told them to proceed. Samuel received a second letter. This one was a notice of termination. It listed the reasons the concern. It cited his refusal to collaborate. It cited his negative impact on team morale. It cited his unauthorized access to confidential systems. This last charge was interesting. It was the hook they hoped would hold. Samuel had indeed accessed the board portal. He had used his physical key. His authority to use that key had never been formally revoked. It was an oversight. The termination letter claimed it was a violation of its policy. Samuel read the letter carefully. He then wrote a reply. He did not send it to HR. He sent it to the company's outside counsel. A law firm was listed in the annual report. He wrote as a shareholder. He owned a few shares from an old incentive plan. He stated that he was being terminated in apparent retaliation for an ethics report. He attached the report case number. He attached the termination letter. He asked for clarification on the company's director and officer insurance policy. He asked if the policy covered legal costs for retaliatory termination lawsuits. He sent the letter by certified mail. This action was a pivot. It moved the conflict from internal HR to external legal risk. The outside law firm had a duty to the corporation, not to Vance. They notified the general counsel immediately. The general counsel saw the liability spike. He called an emergency meeting with Vance and the head of HR. He explained that a wrongful termination suit was now likely. He explained that discovery in such a suit would be broad. It could unearth the insurance exclusion problem. It could expose the board's lack of oversight. Vance said to settle. He authorized a modest severance offer. He wanted Samuel gone quietly. The offer arrived via email. It was 6 months of salary. It required a full release of all claims. It also included a non-disparagement clause. Samuel did not respond. He let the deadline pass. His silence was a weapon. It created uncertainty. The outside counsel grew anxious. They advised the general counsel to increase the offer. They also advised informing the board's audit committee of the potential litigation. This was standard risk disclosure. The general counsel drafted a brief memo for the audit chair. Harriet Colvin read the memo. She was a meticulous woman. She did not like surprises. She requested all documents related to Samuel's employment and his ethics complaint. She spent a weekend reviewing them. She saw the pattern. She saw the move to the basement. She saw the rejected streamline form. She saw the attempt to force resignation. She also saw the unsigned contract. She saw the proposal claiming full compliance. She saw the gap. It was a governance gap. It was her committee's job to ensure such gaps did not exist. She called a special meeting of the audit committee. She did not invite Vance. She invited the general counsel and the head of internal audit. She asked pointed questions. She asked why the material contract review had not caught the insurance issue. She asked why the ethics reporter was being terminated. The general counsel was evasive. The head of internal audit was nervous. The meeting ended without resolution, but a directive was issued. All work on the government proposal was to be halted until the insurance matter was resolved. Vance was incensed. He saw this as board overreach. He was the CEO. He was hired to make decisions. He instructed Carl's team to continue working on the proposal informally. He said the insurance was a minor detail. He said they would get a waiver. He told them to draft the proposal as if the waiver was already in place. This instruction was given verbally, but one of the associates on Carl's team was nervous. They sent an email to the general counsel asking for clarification. They wrote that Carl had told them to proceed. but they were concerned. They asked for written guidance. The general counsel was now in an impossible position. He could not give written approval. The risk was too high. He also could not countermand the CEO directly. He replied with a vague email. It said all work must comply with company policy. It was a useless statement. The associate printed the email. They took it to Carl. Carl shrugged. He said the CEO's directive trumped legal's hesitation. He told the associate to keep working. Samuel, through his network of former colleagues, heard about the tension. He did not act on it. He continued his review. He turned his attention to the Streamline initiative itself. He examined the board minutes that authorized the CEO's restructuring power. The minutes referenced a broad mandate for operational efficiency. But they also contained a caveat. The CEO could not unilaterally alter the company's compliance reporting lines without board approval. Vance had dissolved Samuel's department. That department housed the primary compliance reporting function. Vance had not sought board approval. He had deemed it an operational matter. Samuel added this to his file. He now had 3 pressure points: the material contract review failure, the potential retaliatory termination, the unauthorized alteration of compliance reporting. Each was a dry procedural error. Together, they formed a picture of systemic risk. Samuel compiled them into a dossier. He did not write a narrative. He simply listed the facts. He cited the documents. He included the relevant policy clauses. He titled it Governance, Discrepancies for Board Review. He saved it. He printed a copy. He placed it in a new folder. He then took a calculated step. He contacted a former board member. The man had retired 2 years prior. He had been the chair of the risk committee. He respected Samuel's work. Samuel met him for coffee. He did not bring the dossier. He spoke in general terms. He said he was concerned about the company's direction. He mentioned the government push and the insurance problem. The former board member listened. He asked a few technical questions. He then sighed. He said it sounded like the new CEO was cutting corners. He said the board had a duty to step in. He said he would make a call. That call was made to Harriet Colvin. The two had served together for years. They spoke a common language of risk and duty. The former member expressed his concern. He mentioned Samuel's name. He said if Samuel was worried, the board should be terrified. Harriet thanked him. She now had independent validation. She decided a full board meeting was necessary. She requested an agenda item on enterprise risk management. It was a bland, unthreatening title. Vance could not object. The stage was now set. Samuel had not attacked. He had not threatened. He had merely highlighted contradictions. He had used the company's own rules as a mirror. The reflection was not flattering. Vance, confident and action-oriented, saw only obstacles to be bulldozed. He did not see that the obstacles were the foundation. He prepared for the board meeting with a slide deck on growth. He was ready to dazzle with numbers. He did not prepare for questions about bylaws or charters. Samuel received a formal letter from the company's outside counsel. It was a revised settlement offer. It was now for 1 year's salary. It included a positive letter of reference. The tone was conciliatory. Samuel recognized the shift. The legal team was now driving. They wanted closure. Samuel replied with a single sentence. He said he would consider any offer after the upcoming board meeting. This reply sent a shock through the legal department. How did he know about a confidential board meeting? They assumed he had sources. Their anxiety increased. They advised the general counsel to brief the board fully, to hide nothing. The general counsel spent a sleepless night preparing his memo. He outlined the Samuel situation. He outlined the insurance problem. He outlined the potential litigation. He stopped short of criticizing Vance, but the implications were clear. The CEO's aggressive style was creating legal and regulatory exposure. The memo was distributed to the board 48 hours before the meeting. The directors read it in silence. A chill settled over the boardroom before anyone even arrived. Samuel waited. He knew the meeting was happening. He sat at his kitchen table. He looked at the governance discrepancies dossier. He did not need to send it. The system was now in motion. The board had the information. They were fiduciaries. Their duty was to the corporation, not the CEO. They would have to act. The only question was how. Samuel's role was essentially over. He had presented the facts. The machine would now process them. He expected a quiet negotiation, a gentle push for Vance to resign, a soft landing. He underestimated the depth of Vance's arrogance, and he underestimated the board's fear of personal liability. The board meeting began at 9 a.m. Samuel's phone remained silent. The city outside his window went about its business. Inside the Athon boardroom, a different kind of business was underway. Harriet Colvin led the discussion. She asked the general counsel to walk through his memo. Vance grew impatient. He interrupted. He said this was a distraction. He said the real issue was a disgruntled employee. He said the board should trust his judgment. He said the insurance waiver was days away from being secured. He said the government proposal was a golden opportunity. Harriet listened. She then asked a simple question. She asked if the CEO had obtained board approval before restructuring the compliance function. Vance was taken aback. He said it was an operational decision. Harriet read the relevant section from the board minutes. She read the caveat about compliance reporting lines. The room was quiet. Vance said it was a technicality. Harriet said the board's resolutions were not technicalities. She then asked about the material contract review. Had the audit committee been negligent? The head of internal audit looked at the table. The silence was an answer. Vance tried to rally. He talked about momentum. He talked about shareholder value. He said they couldn't be paralyzed by old rules. A director from the private equity firm that held a large stake spoke next. His voice was cold. He asked about the potential for personal liability if the company breached its covenants due to misrepresentation. He asked if the DTO insurance would cover the board if they knowingly allowed a false proposal to be submitted. The general counsel had to answer. He said coverage was uncertain if there was evidence of bad faith. The word bad faith hung in the air. It was a legal term. It was also a verdict. The board members looked at Vance. They saw not a leader, but a liability. The discussion moved quickly then. It moved to succession planning. Vance realized he was being boxed out. He became angry. He said they were making a huge mistake. He said he would take his team and leave. He stormed out of the meeting. His departure sealed his fate. You cannot abandon your post during a board meeting. It is the ultimate breach of decorum. It is also an admission that you have lost control. The board continued without him. They voted unanimously to suspend Alistair Vance, pending a full independent investigation. They appointed Harriet Colvin as interim executive chair. They instructed the general counsel to secure the insurance waiver immediately. They also instructed him to settle with Samuel on reasonable terms. The goal was now containment, stability over growth. The machine had turned. It had turned slowly, and it had crushed the man who thought he was its master. Samuel learned of the suspension from a news alert on his phone. A brief article from a Business Wire service. It said Athon Logistics CEO had been placed on leave. It cited unspecified governance matters. The article was 3 paragraphs long. It was buried on page 5 of the financial newsfeed. Samuel read it twice. He felt no triumph. He felt a cold clarity. The process had worked. It had worked exactly as designed. It was a design he had helped build. He closed his laptop. He made a cup of tea. He waited for the phone to ring. It would be the general counsel. The offer would be generous now. It would include full vesting of his equity. It would include a consulting contract. It would be quiet and final. He would accept it, and then he would delete the Project Hermes folder. His work was done. The call from the general counsel came 2 hours later. His voice was flat, professional. He proposed a meeting at a neutral location, a law firm's office in the downtown core. Samuel agreed. He wore a dark suit. He arrived precisely on time. The conference room was elegant, silent. The general counsel was there with an outside attorney. The attorney did the talking. He laid out the terms. 2 years of salary as severance. full accelerated vesting of all equity, a 1-year consulting contract at his previous director, level rate, a public announcement of his retirement to pursue other opportunities, a strict non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. Samuel listened. He asked for one amendment. He wanted the consulting contract to be for regulatory advisory work only. He specified it would be directly for the board's audit committee, not for management. The attorneys exchanged a glance. This was a nuance they understood. It meant Samuel's knowledge would be preserved, but walled off from the operational team. It was a reasonable request. They agreed. The documents were already prepared. Samuel read every line. He signed, the attorneys signed. The general counsel signed with a tired hand. It was done in 20 minutes. There was no handshake. Samuel left the building. The late afternoon sun was sharp. He walked to a park and sat on a bench. He allowed himself 10 minutes of stillness. Then he took out his personal phone. He deleted the secure email application he used for the anonymous tip. He reformatted the encrypted USB drive, overwriting the data 3 times. He placed the Project Hermes folder into a cross-cut shredder at a nearby office supply store. The physical documents turned to dust. The process was complete. He went home. At Athon, a new process was beginning. Harriet Colvin, as interim chair, took firm control. Her first act was to send a company-wide email. It was carefully worded. It stated that Alistair Vance was on a leave of absence. It emphasized continuity and the strength of the company's foundational systems. It announced that the pursuit of new government contracts was paused for a strategic review. The email did not mention Samuel. To most employees, it was just another corporate shuffle. The buzz in the cubicles was muted. Speculative. Carl, the head of the new business unit, was summoned to Harriet's temporary office. She asked him for a full briefing on the government proposal. Carl, eager to impress, began with his growth projections. Harriet stopped him. She asked to see the risk assessment. Carl faltered. He said it was in development. Harriet asked to see the sign-off from legal and compliance on the proposal drafts. Carl had none. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. Harriet did not raise her voice. She simply said the unit was being dissolved. Carl's role was eliminated. He was offered a standard severance. He left the office pale, his arrogance finally shattered. Chloe, Samuel's former manager, was reassigned. She was moved to a project management role in logistics, her original field. Her office with a window was given to a senior engineer. She now worked in an open plan area. No one reported to her. The streamline impact forms were quietly retired. The system that archived requests citing policy S-7 was found to have a glitch. It fixed it. Policy S-7 itself was flagged for review. It was discovered to be a draft policy from 5 years prior. It had never been formally adopted. Its use had been an error. No one was blamed. These were the internal corrections. They were administrative, quiet. But the external consequences were just beginning. The Business Wire article about Vance's suspension was a small stone. It created ripples in a pond few people watched. One of those people was a compliance officer at the Defense Logistics Agency. He read the article. He knew Athon had been preparing a proposal. He flagged it in their vendor system. A routine inquiry was sent to Athon's legal department. It asked for confirmation of Athon's compliance with the relevant federal acquisition regulations. It was a standard letter. The general counsel, now reporting directly to Harriet, saw the letter. He could not give simple confirmation. The insurance waiver was still being negotiated. The broker was dragging its feet. The exclusion was a standard part of the policy. Removing it would require a rider and a significant premium increase. The finance department, now under Harriet's scrutiny, balked at the cost. The DLA's inquiry had a 30-day response window. The clock started ticking. Harriet convened the board again. She presented the problem. The directors saw the immediate financial implication. The insurance rider would cost hundreds of thousands annually. It would erase the projected margins from the government work. The opportunity was not golden. It was pyrite. The board voted to formally abandon the pursuit of government contracts. They directed the general counsel to reply to the DLA, withdrawing Athon from consideration. The reply had to include a reason. The general counsel drafted a truthful but minimal statement. He cited inability to meet certain insurance requirements at this time. This reply was a red flag to the DLA compliance officer. Withdrawal was not unusual, but citing insurance was. It suggested a systemic risk. The officer upgraded Athon's risk profile in the vendor database. This was not a punishment. It was a procedural step. It meant any future proposals from Athon would undergo enhanced review. The information was not public, but within the small world of defense logistics contractors, whispers began. Athon was seen as unstable, a major aerospace client, monitoring its supply chain for resilience. Took note Samuel, from his detached position, saw none of this directly. His consulting contract had not yet begun. He was technically still on garden leave. He used the time to review industry publications. He saw a small notice about Athon withdrawing from a DLA bidding process. He understood the cascade it represented. He felt no satisfaction. He simply noted the efficiency of cause and effect. A single clause in a contract had redirected an entire company. It was a lesson in leverage. Meanwhile, Alistair Vance was not idle. His suspension was a humiliation he could not accept. He consulted his own attorney. He believed he had been wrongfully forced out. He believed the board had capitulated to a toxic employee. He directed his attorney to explore his options. The attorney sent a letter to the board. It demanded reinstatement. It threatened a lawsuit for breach of his employment contract. It alleged that the board had acted in bad faith, based on the manipulations of a disgruntled subordinate. This letter was a tactical mistake. It forced the board's hand. They had commissioned an independent investigation into the governance issues. The investigation was ongoing. Vance's threat of litigation caused the investigators to focus on his actions specifically. They subpoenaed his emails. They found the verbal instruction to Carl to proceed. Despite the insurance problem, they found his dismissive comments about compliance in messages to the CFO. They also found that he had not disclosed a personal investment in a technology firm that was a potential subcontractor on the government bid. It was a minor conflict, but it was undisclosed. The investigation report was damning. It was not emotional. It was a dry recitation of facts and policy violations. It concluded that Vance had exhibited poor judgment and created significant risk for the company. It recommended his termination for cause. The board met virtually. The vote was unanimous. Alistair Vance was officially fired. His employment contract had a for causes clause. It meant he received no severance. His unvested equity was forfeited. He was escorted from his home office by a security consultant who retrieved his company devices. Vance's public fall was swift. The business wires ran a second story. Athon Logistics fires CEO for cause. The article mentioned the internal investigation. It quoted the board's statement about upholding the highest governance standards. Industry newsletters picked it up. Comment sections filled with speculation. The narrative solidified. Vance was a reckless leader who cut corners. His reputation was ruined. He would not land another CEO role. He might find work as a consultant, but his aura was gone. Samuel read this article as well. He was in a cafe. He finished his coffee. He felt a faint chill, like a door closing in a distant room. He thought of Vance's first talk, of his eyes sliding over the staff. The arrogance had contained its own destruction. Samuel had merely outlined the contours of the room Vance was in. Vance had chosen to smash into the walls. A week later, Samuel's consulting contract began. His first assignment was from Harriet Colvin directly. She asked him to review the company's entire regulatory architecture and identify any other single points of failure. She wanted a map of all the hidden clauses, the archived memos, the forgotten policies that could pose a similar risk. It was the work he had always done, but now he was being paid a premium for it and reporting directly to the board. He set up a home office. He requested access to specific document repositories. His access was granted immediately. He logged in and saw the familiar systems. He began his audit. It was methodical, boring work. He found a few minor discrepancies in export control classifications. He found an outdated environmental permit for a warehouse. He wrote clear, concise reports. He recommended corrective actions. The company implemented them. He was a ghost in the machine again, but now he was a valued ghost. He was the safeguard. He received a calendar invite for a quarterly review with the audit committee. He joined the video call. Harriet and the other members thanked him for his thorough work. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. It was respectful, distant, professional. After the call, Samuel received a formal letter from the corporate secretary. It confirmed the board's resolution to formally re-establish the Office of Regulatory Architecture as a board-level function. The head of this office would be a future hire. Samuel was asked if he wished to be considered. He declined. He preferred the consultancy. It was cleaner. The company moved on. A new CEO was hired from outside. She was a cautious operator with a background in regulated industries. Her first speech to the company was about sustainable growth and operational integrity. She did not use the word disruption. She met with Samuel once. For 30 minutes, she asked intelligent questions. She listened. She did not suggest he take personal time. Samuel's life regained a rhythm. He worked his consulting hours. He took long walks. He visited museums. He felt a profound neutrality. The revenge was never his. It belonged to the system. He had simply been the one who remembered how the system worked when everyone else forgot. The power had been in the small print all along. The boring text that no one wanted to read. He had read it, and in doing so, he had turned the page for the entire company one afternoon. He received an automated email from the county clerk's office. It was a notification of a new filing. He had set up an alert years ago for his own name and associated businesses. The filing was a lawsuit. Alistair Vance was suing Aethon Logistics for wrongful termination and defamation. He was demanding millions in damages. Samuel read the complaint. It was full of sound and fury. It named the board members. It did not name Samuel. He was irrelevant to Vance's story. Samuel deleted the alert. The lawsuit would go nowhere. The investigation report was too solid. It would be settled quietly, with Vance receiving a fraction of his demand, along with a stricter NDA. The board's DFAO insurance would cover it. The premium would rise next year. Samuel closed his laptop. He looked out his window. The sun was setting. He thought about nothing in particular. The story was over. The sequences were complete. The pressure had been applied, had built, and had found its release through the designated channels. He had remained a calm node in the network. He had never raised his voice. He had never sent an angry email. He had only ever referenced policy, clause, and procedure. And in the end, that was all it took. The corporate world was a system of rules. Most people tried to play the game. He had simply reminded everyone that the rules were the game, and the board, fearing the referee, had removed the player who tried to cheat. He made himself dinner. He ate alone. The silence was no longer the hum of servers, or the quiet of leave. It was just silence. It was neither good nor bad. It was simply the condition that remained when all the procedural noise had faded away. He was satisfied. Not happy, not vindicated, satisfied. Like a mathematician who has solved a complex equation, the solution was elegant. It was also cold, and it was complete. The lawsuit was a predictable tremor. Alistair Vance's complaint was filed in state court. It was a public document. The legal blogs that track corporate governance picked it up. The headlines were modest. Ousted CEO sues former company. Samuel read the summary. The claims were broad. Wrongful termination, defamation, tortious interference with business expectancy. The language was aggressive. It painted Vance as a visionary brought down by cowardly bureaucrats. It mentioned no names below the board level. Samuel was a ghost in the litigation as well. Aethon's outside counsel filed a motion to dismiss. It attached the independent investigation report as an exhibit. The report was redacted, but its weight was obvious. The motion argued that Vance had been terminated for clear cause. It cited his own emails. The judge scheduled a hearing in 90 days. This was the legal machinery beginning its slow grind. It would consume time and money, but the outcome was almost certain. Vance would lose. He was litigating out of spite, not strategy. Samuel's consultancy continued. His quarterly report to the audit committee was approved without comment. He identified 2 more minor compliance gaps. One involved international customs documentation. The other was a data retention policy that conflicted with new European regulations. The company acted on both. Samuel's invoices were paid automatically. He had no human contact beyond email with the corporate secretary. The arrangement was perfect. It was pure transaction. Then a new pressure point emerged. It came from an unexpected direction. The aerospace client, Avionics Systems, conducted its annual supplier audit. The audit was routine. A team of 3 visited Aethon's headquarters. They reviewed quality controls, financial stability, and regulatory adherence. The audit usually took 3 days. This time, it took 5. The lead auditor asked pointed questions about management stability. He referenced the public CEO litigation. He asked to see the minutes of the board meeting where the government contract pursuit was abandoned. Harriet Colvin, as interim chair, had to handle this personally. She provided the redacted minutes. She explained the strategic decision. The auditor took notes. He was polite but thorough. After his team left, Aethon received a preliminary finding. They were placed on watch status. This was not a catastrophic rating, but it was a downgrade. It meant Avionics would increase its oversight. It also meant Aethon's bids for new work from Avionics would be subject to additional scrutiny. Their pricing advantage eroded overnight. The board was notified. The new CEO, Lena Carter, presented a mitigation plan. It involved enhanced reporting and a roadshow to key clients. The plan was approved. The cost was significant. It came directly from the operational budget. Managers were told to find efficiencies. The mood in the company shifted. The era of aggressive growth was clearly over. It was now about consolidation and risk management. Employees who had thrived under Vance's chaotic energy grew restless. Some left. Their departures were quiet, noted only in the weekly HR digest. Samuel observed this from a distance. His consultancy did not cover client relations, but he understood the cause and effect. Vance's public meltdown had a longer tail than anyone anticipated. It was not just a personnel issue, it was a reputational stain that affected commercial trust. This was a consequence the board had underestimated. They had focused on legal liability. They had neglected market perception. Harriet Colvin requested a special consultation with Samuel. It was outside the scope of his contract. She asked to meet in person. He agreed. They met at the same law firm's offices. She looked tired. She got straight to the point. She asked Samuel, based on his long tenure, if he knew of any other skeletons in the closet, anything that Avionics or another client might discover that the board had missed. She was thinking of old contracts, side agreements, verbal understandings. She wanted a full historical audit. Samuel said he would need unfettered access to the archives, including the records of the former CEO before Vance. Harriet authorized it immediately. She gave him a letter granting him full authority. It was countersigned by the General Counsel. Samuel began the next day. He moved his work to a secure room at the company's records center. It was a windowless space filled with bankers' boxes and old servers. The dust was thick. He started with the file servers. He searched for keywords related to exceptions, waivers, and side letters. He found mostly routine documents. Then he turned to the physical boxes. They contained records from the company's early days. Over 15 years ago, he found handwritten notes from board meetings. He found drafts of old partnership agreements. It was tedious work. On the 3rd day, he found a thin folder marked Avionics Fay Understanding. It was not a contract. It was a memorandum of understanding from a decade prior. It was signed by Aethon's founder and Avionics's former head of procurement. The MO was vague. It outlined a commitment to a long-term partnership. It included a handwritten note in the margin. It said, "Pricing held at 2012 levels for 5 years, extendable by mutual consent." This note was initialed by both parties. Samuel checked the subsequent formal contracts. The pricing had indeed remained static for 5 years. Then it had increased marginally. But the phrase "extendable by mutual consent" was never formally revisited or terminated. In strict legal terms, it was arguably still in effect. Avionics had been paying higher rates for years under new contracts. But if they chose to be adversarial, they could cite this old note to demand a reversion to ancient pricing or claim back payments. It was a sliver of risk, a tiny crack. Samuel documented his find. He did not interpret it. He simply scanned the MAU and the relevant contracts. He created a timeline. He wrote a 1-page summary. He sent it to Harriet and the General Counsel. He marked it Historical Review Finding History for assessment. The response was swift. The General Counsel called an emergency call with Evelyn's legal team. He presented the document proactively. He framed it as a discovery during a routine historical archive project. He said Athon believed in full transparency with its partners. He offered to formally nullify the old MU with a new agreement. Evelyn's lawyers were surprised. They had no knowledge of the document. They said they would review. 2 days later, Evelyn's head of supply chain called Lena Carter directly. His tone was cool. He said while the MOU was ancient, it was concerning that it had not been disclosed during previous audits. He said it indicated record-keeping irregularities. He said the watch status would remain for the foreseeable future. This was a setback. Athon's proactive honesty had backfired. It had revealed a different weakness: administrative sloppiness. The board was frustrated. They felt they were playing a game where every move uncovered another problem. Harriet asked Samuel to continue his review, to leave no box unopened. Samuel returned to the records room. He felt a new tension now. His work was no longer academic. It was becoming a mind-clearing operation. Each document had potential energy. He proceeded with even greater caution. He found nothing else of major significance, just the normal detritus of a growing company. But the act of looking was itself a message. The board was scared. Their fear was a tangible thing in the quiet room. While Samuel sifted through paper, the lawsuit progressed. The judge denied Vance's motion for an injunction to get his job back. The hearing on the motion to dismiss was scheduled. Legal fees were mounting. Athon's DDO insurance carrier sent a letter. They noted the litigation and the client audit issues. They declared that at the next renewal period, the premium would be subject to a significant market adjustment. This was corporate speak for a massive increase. The finance department ran the numbers. The increase would wipe out the profit from 2 of their largest contracts. The board was now facing a financial consequence directly tied to the Vance episode. It was no longer about reputation. It was about dollars and cents. They had to demonstrate stability to the insurer. The quickest way to do that was to settle the Vance lawsuit. But settling would require a payment. A payment would be an admission of some weakness. It was a terrible choice. They chose to settle. They instructed counsel to negotiate a confidential resolution. Vance, sensing their desperation, held out for a higher number. The negotiations stretched over weeks. Finally, a figure was agreed upon. It was a low 7-figure sum. It was to be paid in a lump sum. In return, Vance would drop all claims, sign an NDA, and never disparage the company again. The settlement was executed. A lawsuit disappeared from the court docket. The legal blogs wrote a final short piece. Athon and former CEO settle. No details. It was over, but the cost was real. The settlement amount combined with the anticipated insurance hike created a budget shortfall. Lena Carter announced a structural efficiency program. It was a euphemism for layoffs. The cuts targeted middle management and underperforming divisions. 50 people lost their jobs. They were given standard severance packages. The mood in the company turned grim. The hallways were quiet. People worked with their heads down. Samuel was insulated from this. His consultancy was a fixed cost, separate from the operational budget. The mood in the company turned grim. He completed his historical audit. He submitted a final report stating no other material documents had been found. Harriet thanked him. She asked if he would consider a full-time role as Chief Compliance Officer. It would be a board-level position with a substantial salary. Samuel declined again. He said his value was in his independence. Harriet did not push. She understood. The quarter ended. The financial results were soft. The analyst call was somber. Lena Carter talked about a year of foundation rebuilding. The stock price of the parent company, which was publicly traded, dipped 5%. It was a manageable drop, but it was a signal. The market had noted the turmoil. Samuel's contract was up for renewal. He received the paperwork automatically. It was for another year with a slight fee increase. He signed it and returned it. The process was effortless. He realized he had achieved a form of perfect corporate detachment. He was a necessary component, like a fire alarm, ignored until needed, then relied upon completely. He was paid well for his silence and his memory. It was an elegant existence. One evening, he received a LinkedIn message. It was from a former Ethon employee, one of the junior associates on Carl's team who had been let go. The associate asked if Samuel was available for consulting. He had joined a small startup in the logistics tech space. They needed regulatory guidance. Samuel replied with his standard consulting agreement and rate card. The startup agreed. Samuel had his first external client. It was a small project. It was also a beginning. He worked on the startup's files in the morning and on Ethon's matters in the afternoon. The duality pleased him. He was applying the same skills in two different contexts. One was to clean up the past. The other was to build a cleaner future. The work was identical in its substance. Only the company names changed. At Ethon, the new compliance officer was hired. She was a competent woman from a rival firm. She introduced herself to Samuel over email. She asked for a briefing. Samuel provided a bullet point list of ongoing issues and where the relevant documents were stored. The exchange took 20 minutes. His institutional knowledge was being transferred. His own importance was diminishing. This was as it should be. The year turned. The insurance renewal came up. The premium increased by 40%. The finance team negotiated it down to 30%. It was still a major hit. Lena Carter had to revise her earnings forecast downward. The board accepted it. There was no other choice. Samuel's life settled into a new rhythm. He bought a quieter apartment farther from the city center. He took up cycling. He rarely thought about Ethon, except during his scheduled work hours. The revenge was complete, but its echoes were still fading. The company was smaller, more cautious, less profitable. It was a neutered version of Vance's ambitious vision. It was also a survivor. It would not take reckless risks again. It would plod along, serving its clients, meeting its obligations, avoiding drama. That was its victory. A victory of stasis over ambition. Samuel sometimes wondered if he had saved the company or strangled it. He decided the question was irrelevant. He had followed the rules. The rules had dictated the outcome. His personal intent had never been a factor. He was a mechanic. The machine had been making a dangerous noise. He had diagnosed the faulty part. The owners had chosen to replace it and drive more slowly. That was all. He closed his Ethon work laptop one Friday afternoon. He had no tasks pending. His next audit committee check-in was a month away. He would spend the intervening time on his startup client. He shut the laptop lid. The soft click was the only sound in the room. He looked out at the trees beyond his balcony. They were beginning to turn color. It was a neutral observation, a fact of the season. He felt the same neutrality about Ethon. It was a fact of his professional history. A closed chapter. The system had worked. He had worked within the system. There was nothing else to say.